All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
Okay. I am Steve Stroh, N8GNJ, and I'm editor of the Zero Retries newsletter. I've been publishing this thing for 3.5 years now. And it, as I'll explain as I go, it was a reaction to being a techie and not seeing enough or enough interesting stuff that's happening in the mainstream media. So I'm going to try to launch. I apologize if this is a little rough going for a few minutes. This is the first time I've used Keynote because Microsoft really ticked me off about their policies with Office 365. So I have now converted over to Apple Keynote for my presentations, and but I haven't actually presented with it on Zoom yet. So here we go. Let's see, Keynote, share. Okay, how copy? Everybody
Great.
seeing the slide deck?
Yeah, we can see it. Yep.
Okay. Oops, wrong one. Better to start at the beginning. Okay, so um, this presentation is not. I'm sorry. I'm Steve Stroh, N8GNJ newsletter, um, and I'm a techie. I've been seeing a lot. I used to write about the wireless, a facet of the wireless industry, not the cellular wireless industry, back in the 2000s. And so I picked up a lot of uh, capabilities to cast a wide net for interesting news, which I proxied out to amateur radio. And as interesting things fell away um, in amateur radio, the stuff that I was interested in, like packet radio, I started casting a wide net for stuff to just keep my personal curiosity satisfied. And I got more and more frustrated that this stuff that I wanted to read about wasn't showing up in the amateur radio media. And so um, I I thought, how why not try doing a newsletter? Um, so the goal of this presentation isn't necessarily to promote zero retries or the projects that you'll see that I mentioned. It's to explain uh, how much is going on in and adjacent to amateur radio, the technological innovation that you're just not seeing from the mainstream amateur radio media, all of the media, the YouTube, the newsletters, the podcasts, the magazines, etc. So, and zero retries is my answer to at least part of that. Little bit of history. There's just not much techie material in print in text these days. There is QEX, not quite to my taste, and now that ARRL membership is below 20% of the U.S. amateur radio population, it's inaccessible to most people unless you want to pay the $60 a year. I figured it can't hurt to start my own newsletter, and the tools got a lot better in the last 5 years to be able to do that. Basically, when I publish zero retries, I write, I hit publish, and the rest of it is taken care of by the platform that I'm using, which happens to be Substack at the moment. Um, and I hit publish for the first time early in the morning on July 9th, 2021, and it's published every Friday since. Um, it nominally goes out at 15:30 Pacific, but or sometimes I miss that deadline, but it's always gone out on Friday. Uh, what's different? Um, I basically go. What's different about zero retries is that it's a very personal take on the stories. I do have a few contributing writers, a handful, but mostly I go. What's different is I don't wait for the stories to come to me. I go out and look for the stories, and then if necessary, I write about them. So it's very personal. It's very opinionated. It's very, I don't know. It's like I like to think of Zero Retries as sitting across the table with you know an adult beverage in your hand and having a long drawn out conversation and exchange of views. Um, and I didn't think it was going to be weekly every week. I figured I'd run out of material, but the more I wrote, the more there was to write about. So I just keep going. Um, I I see amateur radio as a big, big, big continuum, and a lot of people stay in their silos. They want to they only want to care about CW, or they only want to care about DXing, or they only want to care about WinLink or packet radio or blah blah blah. I see a whole bunch of different activities, and I see how they interrelate. But I'm a ham of, I guess, 40 years now, and and I see a lot of interconnection, especially on the digital techie data thing portions of the amateur radio activity. Um, One of the audiences that I started writing for pretty quickly after I started Zero Retries was uh, techies that were previously not interested in amateur radio because they didn't care about HF, they didn't care about DXing, they didn't care about contesting, they didn't care about CW. Um, you know, but when amateur radio started to get interesting to them, when you could start doing microwave networking, when you could start doing software defined radio, and especially when amateur radio came to them at conferences like DEF CON, all of a sudden they started paying attention, and they said, "Oh, you mean I could hack on radio things if I got my amateur radio license?" And the folks that were, presenting it said, "Heck yes." And they said, "Count me in." They walked in cold, almost cold, looked at the question pool, walked into the tech VE, passed, got their license, and didn't look back. I also, in Zero Retries, I also cover a number of activities that are adjacent to amateur radio, but technically are not amateur radio, such as these. Um, Let me explain a few of these. Starlink is, of course, the low Earth orbit satellite broadband system that I am talking to you on right now. I had my only other option here in Bellingham for broadband is um, Comcast, and once I tried Starlink, and it worked great. Um, it has been fantastically reliable. In fact, it has been more reliable than Comcast because my Comcast cable modem would go out for about half an hour in the wee hours of every morning for no reason, and then it would come back. And Starlink doesn't do that. I've had one outage with Starlink in the 2+ years I've had it. Meshtastic is a text messaging system that mostly operates on 902 to 928 megahertz here in the US. It's been very, very popular. It operates on a system called on a spread spectrum technology called LoRa, and you can buy the devices for like $20 to $50 in all manner of devices, portability or base, etc. It's getting an awful lot of interest from techies. It's just a fantastic playground. And the best description of Meshtastic I've heard is that it's a gateway drug to amateur radio. Similar, there's an awful lot of people who are doing device and unit tracking with APRS, but they're doing it on LoRa because they don't have to bother with an amateur radio license. LoRa was a contraction of long range. And again, it's a low power, what's called Part 15 or unlicensed system that operates, again, here in the US on 902 to 928 megahertz. In Europe, there are two chunks of spectrum that they can operate license exempt on, is at 433 megahertz and 868 megahertz. Halo is a um, new, essentially a version of Wi-Fi that operates on 902 to 928 megahertz, so it punches through trees. That's starting to get some attraction. Software-defined receivers, no license required for doing any receive activity at all. StatNogs, satellite network open source ground station. This is the activity of a group in Spain, and as we'll talk about towards the end, this is a network, a worldwide network of receive-only ground stations that is designed to downlink data from research satellites that universities and other not-for-profit entities put up. And usually they're using VHF, UHF, and quite often it's amateur radio. There's a group here in the Seattle area that's going to be doing such a satellite, and I'll talk about that. And GNU Radio. GNU Radio is the universal framework for doing software-defined radio. Basically, and with the right hardware, no joke, you can sit down and write yourself a radio of any kind. I'm gonna breeze through these next. Again, I'm not trying to promote these specific ones. I'm trying to give you a idea of the breadth of what's going on, in that you're not reading about, hearing about generally in amateur radio. M17. This is a digital voice system that is completely open source. You can do it in software. This is one of those things that you can write, and people have written a M17 radio for GNU Radio, which then runs on GNU Radio compatible hardware. There's no proprietary technology in this like there is with DMR or D-Star. That codec chip that everybody gets so worked up about, that's not present in an M17 system, or doesn't need to be. Sometimes there is. It comes along for the ride, but it isn't required. In place of that chip, there is a system called Codec 2, which is again software and a specification to do that function. Now that we have very capable, fast, cheap processors. And the biggest reason to mention M17 is that, just like going to the techies, M17 is bringing people into amateur radio because they were previously turned off about the proprietary aspects of amateur radio, especially digital voice, like that codec. So no codec, completely open source. They said, oh, okay, now I'm interested in amateur radio because of M17, and solely because of M17. Arden, amateur radio emergency data network. This is firmware that can be flashed onto Wi-Fi devices and wireless ISP devices to form a network, to form a microwave mesh network. This is very popular down in Southern California. We'll talk about the Washington system called HamWAN. That's very different than Arden, but Arden is more popular, more broadly popular, and it's better supported and especially better promoted. It's bringing a lot of folks into amateur radio microwave networking that previously had no interest in amateur radio. I know of folks who have gotten their amateur radio license specifically because they wanted to experiment with Arden. MMDVM, multi-mode digital voice modem. And this was an effort, it's now 10 years old, to allow amateur radio to use a conventional FM repeater on these digital voice modes like D-Star and DMR and System Fusion and even P25. It is literally a modem. It's a little piece of hardware and software that if you embed in the middle of a FM repeater, will let that FM repeater pass the digital voice modes, all of them. And there's a very cool version of this, or it's actually another piece of software that isn't in the standard release of MMDVM right now, called MMDVM TNC. You can do data. So if you add this, add an MMDVM to an FM repeater with MMDVM software loaded, that repeater can then be a data repeater. I'll talk about that in a bit. Is something that's a bit of a passion for me. And M17, it'll be just another mode. New packet radio. This is despite the state, the association by name in packet radio, no commonality with what we know of as packet radio. It's designed by a French amateur radio operator. It's about as different from conventional packet radio as you can get. The radio has an Ethernet interface, not an RS-232 or USB. The protocol over the air is TCP/IP, not AX25. It's high speed, a minimum of 56 kilobits per second. It doesn't go any slower than that. It can't go any slower than that. And it can go as fast as 1 megabit per second if you have access to a 1 megahertz channel. I would love to expound at length on this, about why we can't do 1 megabit per second here in the US because of antiquated FCC rules, which we might be able to get fixed, I hope. But right now we can do 56 kilobits per second with new packet radio on UHF. There is a possibility that us in North America will get access to a geosynchronous satellite payload to be able to do the kinds of things that the Europeans are doing with the QO100 geosynchronous amateur radio payload above Africa. Uplink on 2.4 gigahertz, downlink on 10 gigahertz. Ours, if we do one for North America, it will probably be uplink on 5 gigahertz. There is already some work already done for that. And QO100 is doing, the QO100 users are just having a blast with the QO100 satellite. The hope we have for a North America satellite comes, ironically enough, from the European Space Agency, not NASA, not Starlink, not any of the other likely sponsors of such a system in North America. It's European Space Agency because our good friends up in Canada are members of the European Space Agency and they'd like to share the wealth on this project. Just mentioning the 902 to 928 megahertz band because amateur radio has a one-to-one overlap of the entire band. It's shared equally with unlicensed Part 15 users. There's a fair number of amateur radio repeaters, but those are right at the edge of the band where the least of the unlicensed activity is. This is cause for concern at the moment because a FCC inquiry by a company called NextNav is proposing essentially taking sole title to 15 of the 26 megahertz available in this band and crowding every other user into the middle of the band and taking 15 megahertz for their exclusive use. And they're getting a lot of pushback on that. And I don't know how this is going to turn out. I hope it doesn't happen, but it may. Okay, so I'm going to issue another disclaimer. Again, I'm not necessarily promoting any of these particular projects, as the be all and end all. I'm giving you an example. I'm giving you examples of the breadth of the technological innovation that is happening right now, present day, in amateur radio that you might not have heard about. Digital amateur television. This is so cool. Full motion, good image quality in as little as, this is a typo, should be 1 megahertz, based on a spec from the digital or the satellite digital television community that made an open specification that amateur radio has adopted. There's a lot of DATV going on. California, Colorado, um, maybe Seattle. I don't know. I had one very brief hint that there might be some DATV activity here in Seattle. I'd love to learn more about that if anybody knows any details. Um, One of the more interesting things I recently learned is that you can decode digital amateur television with one of these inexpensive software defined receivers, little SDR dongles, with software, an SDR dongle, and something as simple as a Raspberry Pi. And then you can be receiving all this. So, what if every metro area in the country put up a DATV repeater and started streaming video bulletins? We could be doing essentially, YouTube on amateur radio. And wouldn't that be cool if we could show that to the impressionable young kids, of the video generation or video and YouTube generation? VARA FM and VARA HF. This is a mode that is amazing in its performance, and basically it takes over the entire compute capacity of a typical Windows desktop PC, multi-core, multi-gigahertz processor, et cetera, and gigs of RAM. It can do, under ideal conditions, with the right radio and USB audio adapter equipment, can do up to 25 kilobits per second in a standard 15, 20 kilohertz VHF or UHF channel. Now, keep in mind that we've been struggling to do 9,600 bits per second in that same, and it doesn't work all that great. But VARA works great. The HF version of VARA, especially now that we have the new regulations for a 2.8 standard 2.8 kilohertz channel everywhere in HF, 7 kilobits per second. And again, this is reliable stuff because there are many, many layers of things that VARA does: forward error correction, auto negotiation, channel sounding, OFDM, different levels of modulation. I've written entire issues of Zero Retries about the wonders of VARA FM. Not to promote VARA FM per se, but say this is the kind of thing that is going on and what's possible in amateur radio. K9Q radio. This is another one that I challenge you to have heard of. So the way that these software-defined receivers actually work is that they don't send a conventional signal, tuned signal out to the computer. It sends what's called I and Q, meaning this is everything I'm seeing within the entire passband of the unit. And then it's up to the software to parse out what you want. So what we're used to seeing is we want to listen to one signal at a time. We tune it. We see the band scope of what the amplitude of the signals that the system is receiving. K9Q radio lets you decode all of those signals simultaneously and record them if you want. So every FM channel on the entire band of 220 or 2 meters, or portion of the 440, depending on the receiver, 6 meters, 10 meters, etc. All that. You can record, you can receive all of that, you can decode all of that, you can record all of that simultaneously, which that's a different way of thinking about a radio. Again, innovation. CATS, Communications and Telemetry System. This is one guy in New Brunswick, Canada, I think it is. He decided that he wanted to do APRS better. So he did everything differently. 440 megahertz, 9600, frequency shift keying instead of modulating the radio with audio frequency shift keying. It's standard forward error correction. And the infrastructure system that he proposed was all in the feline, so it's FeliNet instead of, APR, I forget what the APRS infrastructure is called. And if you're curious about that, look at cats.radio. APRS messaging. We've had APRS messaging or APRS, it seems like forever. And, you follow cars around or occasionally, doing search and rescue operation. Boring old APRS. Well, APRS messaging has been in there since nearly the beginning. It was specified in there, and you can, and if you've got a capable radio like a Kenwood TMD 710, you can send and display messages over the air through APRS direct. Nobody does that because everybody hates typing on a 12 key touchtone keypad. So it just never really got used. But Meshtastic showed that there is interest in such things, and you can do this now if you have a capable TNC that will talk to your phone via Bluetooth. You can get APRS Droid if you have an Android phone, or APRS.Fi for Apple devices, and look around in there, and it says it has a messaging section, so you can send and receive messages over the air via APRS between users. And amateur radio really needs an app like Meshtastic that is just for messaging via APRS messaging. ARDC, Amateur Radio Digital Communications. Way back in the day, in the early days of the internet, a ham literally wandered down the hall at UCSD, talked to the guy who was coordinating all of the allocations of IP addresses. He said, this internet is, looks interesting, and ham radio, loves to experiment with things. Could you give us some IP addresses? And he said, sure. He gave us a Class A address block, IPv4 Class A at 44 everything. Fast forward 30 years, amateur radio had not used much of the 16 million addresses in that block. So, and they thought, well, there's a lot of value in this. So they incorporated themselves quietly, sold 25% of them to Amazon, and got in excess of $120 million for it. They have invested that very prudently, and they are now a not-for-profit charitable foundation, which is required to, I believe, disperse 5% of your endowment every year, which amounts to grant. They now provide grants of up to, well, they disperse $5 million in grants annually. I was involved with this group for a bit, for 2 years on their grants advisory committee. They do amazingly good work. And there have been several grants to groups in the Seattle area, or in Western Washington anyway. One of them was the Boeing Employees Amateur Radio Society. They got a grant. They're funding a lot of research and development, including MMDVM, and there's still 12 million addresses out there, and their current effort with 44net, the 12 million addresses, is that they're putting together they are prototyping now, actively testing a virtual private network. And basically, if you, for example, for me, nobody can come into my network on Starlink, because Starlink uses a system for IPv4 addresses called carrier grade network address translation, CGNAT. Basically impossible. If anybody wants access to the systems in my network, I have to go out, and there has to be a meet in the middle. ARDC VPN would be an ideal solution for this, especially for amateur radio systems. One of the projects that I'm working on is I want to create a test bed with the many, 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 many radios and many, many, many data devices that I have in my shop. I want to put them on the air inside the shop, all talking to each other, and then give people access to those things to be able to do testing. for new modems, or do aggressive, multi-unit testing, and or try different packet technologies, etc. But there will be a CATS system operating in my shop, and I want to be able to have amateur radios that are interested be able to shell into my system and try it out. Let's see, packet radio is coming back. Actually, it never went away. WinLink is based on packet radio. APRS is based on packet radio, and those never went away. And so there is a group in the Northeast called EastNet. Microwave is just another form of packet radio, more advanced, operating on TCP/IP. There's a group in North Carolina called NC Packet that's doing a packet radio network. And I really hope that MMDVM TNC, this data mode for repeaters, takes off. I think it will be big. Software, just touching about software-defined radio. What's really cool about SDR, and one of the reasons why the current FCC regulations about different types of modulation are really outmoded, is a lot of those regulations were based on not on the worry that analog techniques used for data communications, basically if you want faster data, you had wider data. And they said, nope, you can't do that. But with software-defined radio now, you can specify exactly what you want the waveform to be, exactly how wide, exactly how highest amplitude, and the radio hardware will do that. Essentially, software-defined radio hardware is a great big digital to analog converter on the transmitter side and an analog to digital converter on the receive side. So you get to specify exactly what your waveform over the air is going to be. And because this is all being done in software now, we're back in the game, because there's an awful lot of hams that know how to write software. Designing hardware is a little harder. Not as hard as it used to be, but still hard, especially for RF. RF is tough. But being able to write software for a standardized hardware unit is just amazing. I love this quote. I needed a different radio, so I sat down and wrote one. That's literally happening. And we've got more than enough, in my opinion, software-defined radios for HF, because RF under 50 megahertz is easy and cheap. We're still waiting for the equivalent of a flex radio for VHF and UHF. And every time I see the flex radio guys at a conference, like I just did at Pacificon, I put in a plug. Please, please, please do a VHF, UHF radio. I'd buy it in a heartbeat. And software-defined receivers for VHF and UHF, that's a solved problem. We have those in abundance. We just need the transmitter. And if you want to just dink around with this at no cost, look up GNU Radio. And there's even a graphical user interface for building radios called GNU Radio Companion. You literally just select a block and drag it around like you're doing a diagramming tool. Hometown audience. Here's a couple of slides for us locals. HamWAN is just an absolute treasure in Western Washington. It's a amateur radio microwave network. If you can see one of the HamWAN nodes, you can get on HamWAN. And it's a fast TCP/IP network. The hardware is not that expensive. It's, I think $70-80 to buy the radio, another $30-40 to buy the dish, and then you got to aim it, and it's not simple to get all that configured. And the HamWAN folks are a little terse. Let's just say terse about helping you. It's kind of a rite of passage, kind of like CW was back in the day, to get yourself connected to HamWAN. But once you do, you're on it, and it runs from Bellingham to Vancouver And Doug, thank you. I will be happy to turn the page over to you for Hamway. Husky Sat 2. I just read about this yesterday. Follow those links. And the electrical engineer folks at the UW are building a new satellite, research satellite, that will have some very interesting capabilities, including a software-defined radio, several software-defined radios on the satellite in orbit. That will be very cool to see what they do with that. Puget Sound Amateur Radio TCP/IP network. 1995, we were doing TCP/IP over amateur radio UHF repeaters, 9,600 bits per second, and it worked. That's how I know data over repeaters works great. And this one is a hot button of mine, a new conference that I'm tentatively calling Amateur Radio Technological Innovation Conference, because I don't want it to be associated with the former conferences that have apparently died. Tapper used to do a conference called the Digital Communications Conference that rotated around the country. It was a big one, 3-day, lots of people attended, including internationally, but Tapper is apparently out of the conference business now. Microhams used to do a 1-day conference in Redmond. They're apparently out of the conference business too. So my wife, Tina, and I are seriously exploring the possibility of doing such a conference here. And the first one, if we do it, it will be here in the Seattle area because that's easy for us, in fall 2025. And here's my wildest fantasy: Washington Amateur Radio Technical Society. And again, I wanted this disclaimer. I'm not dissing any existing amateur radio club, but I haven't found one that I quite fit into now that Microhams has kind of morphed into a more general interest amateur radio club. And my dear departed Northwest Amateur Packet Radio Association is long dead. So I'm imagining maybe the possibility of a new group that would be entirely virtual, meets online. Well, it would meet monthly online with maybe a quarterly meeting that rotates around the state of Washington. And I really would love to see this tie the state together, on amateur radio, maybe even using NVIS HF for regional communications, standardized, email over HF, et cetera. I don't know. This is just again, a wild fantasy. And then here's my final slide. Zero Retries newsletter. This is where you go to read or drink the Kool-Aid. If you go to zeroretries.org, the platform I use, Substack, will encourage you. It'll default to the paid options. That's not required. The content is identical between the paid subscriptions and the free subscription. The paid subscription is appreciated, but absolutely not required. I have a very hard policy about keeping the information that I develop out in the public for everyone to read, because that's how I learned. There's fantastic material out there that everybody is sharing in the open, in the public, and I want to be part of that. I'm not putting anything that I write behind a paywall. I might temporarily do that in the future, and I have a book in progress that will be a paid book, but Zero Retries material is out in the open for everybody to read. And that is it. Let's see, stop share. Okay. Doug Kingston raised his hand. Go, Doug.
Hey there. Thank you for coming and speaking with us, Steve. Yeah, I also worked with Steve on the grant committee for several years. Yeah, just speaking on behalf of HamWAN, I'm also a VP of HamWAN organization, and we recognize that the documentation and configuring issues, and I have some really good ideas about how to make that a much easier process. With a little bit of scripting, I need to essentially upgrade the website so that you can basically input the the stuff that's peculiar to you, your call sign, your location, your grid, or that sort of stuff, and then produce the right config file. And then the instructions on how to import that is much simpler than having to cut and paste in each of the segments. I think the description there of what you're putting in and why it's there is important, and in fact could be enhanced to explain a little bit more about what each of those things do. But I think that should be more instructive rather than the actual process. But that's details.
Doug, I will buy you dinner if you put me at the head of your beta tester for that.
No problem.
Let's see. I don't know how your conferences work. Okay. Thank you, Quentin. Warts. Okay, Warts. The acronym Warts is off the table.
It's not the nicest one anyway, so you may want to rethink it.
Okay. So any questions, comments, criticisms? I'm wide open.
This is Bill, K7WFB. First, thank you both for this presentation, and I've been reading Zero Retries for about 3, 4 months at the suggestion of Jack, and getting a lot out of it, and just enjoying the endless series of rabbit holes that you open up for us. It's just a lot of fun, and it also occurs to me that this presentation today is just a great introduction to this whole field. I can think of several friends who are not here today that I'm definitely going to recommend this to just get the the overview of what's happening. It's great fun. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Say thank you very much. Yes, that was quite the data dump. So many different things. I was interested. You talked about cats.radio, APRS 9600 baud. So Doug, you may remember a transmitter down on VHF. Is he still there? A transmitter on VHF that was causing interference on the Lake Forest Park receiver. And I think it was one of these 9600 APRS transmitters. It's still going on UHF. And it still has some of this splatter on 440.8. I can watch it. I found out it's KU7M that has this thing. And it's an Alinco. I talked to him about it. But anyway, is Doug still there? I didn't. Oh, there
Yeah, I'm here.
You remember that?
Yeah, vaguely.
Okay. Well, anyway, that transmitter on 440.8 is still going. The splatter's much, much less now. He must have toned it down. And I looked at that cats.radio, and the hot thing about it is that the PTT is fast. And that must be what's doing it to this Alinco.
I can almost guarantee you that what KU7M is using is conventional 9600 frequency shift keying, not the CATS stuff. Because
really?
I was part of that network for a while.
Okay.
And it was all the older 9600, not what CATS is doing.
Not cats. All right. Well,
Not
thanks
CATS.
for telling me that. Okay. Well, it was interesting at the time, and I still see it going. And I was wondering, well, how can I listen to it? What is that transmission all about? But
you could, if you wanted to decode that, you can fire, if you have a audio interface, what was once upon a time called a sound card interface, you can load up a piece of software called Dire Wolf.
I have that, and I have a digirig. So hey, I'm ready to go.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, you're ready to go. So just set it up, tune to that frequency.
Dire Wolf will do 9600. Isn't there a problem?
Absolutely.
Might be the digirig then. Anyway, it decodes the slow speed APRS on 144395, but I'll try it. Thanks.
What's your radio?
I've got the couple of Yaesus that I've been using for it, an 897 and an 857.
How are you connected?
It's with the cables that Digirig Mobile came with.
Oh, okay. So that's why, okay. No, I apologize. You won't be able to receive it because you don't have what's called a flat audio connection that bypasses the pre-emphasis and de-emphasis stages in your radio.
Okay.
So if you have a radio, for example, a TM V71A, that has this magic 6-pin mini DIN connection at the back of the radio that pulls the audio signals out of the radio bypassing the pre-emphasis and de-emphasis. That was the magic that let the old 9600
Wait a minute, you
operate.
said TMV71A, is that the Kenwood?
Yes,
Oh,
TMV71A, or the D710 will do it too. Yeah,
okay.
borrow someone's D710. That'll do it
They'll do
in
it
a
all.
heartbeat. Yeah.
That's what I need, more radios. Thanks.
Yep. Or just email KU7M. Anybody else?
I had a question about M17. I just heard about this like a week or two ago and was noticing the Connect Systems radio that came out this year. Is there a good place to go get some more information about that?
Uh, M17project.org, I think is the main website. This is another disclaimer I would have mentioned if I'm having a very long discussion is that not all of these projects are exactly well documented or well maintained. M17 is largely the creation of one ham in Poland and with a cast of supporters. So I guess the easiest way to get up to speed on M17 is find an email mailing list that I'm maintaining called M17-users and at groups.io. And that's so most of the M17 activity prior to this year was, more or less theoretical development and some boutique hardware and adapting radios, existing radios, et cetera. But we finally got to the point where M17, the specification was stable and well enough understood that a radio like the CS7000 M17 was possible. And I pointed out that possibility to Jerry at Connect Systems and said, hey, Jerry, you've got this new super radio that you want the community to help you develop. One of the things it could do is this new mode called M17. And Jerry, was a typical entrepreneur and said, interesting. And before I knew it, he announced this new portable radio called the CS7000 M17. And very soon he will start selling the CS7000 M17 Plus, which will do both M17 and DMR. So I think that functionally for digital voice, M17 is not a lot different than DMR or D-Star or System Fusion, but it's so cool and it's so open source and it appeals to my techie proclivities that and something I didn't get a chance to mention is that one of the activities of the folks who are doing this MMDVM that they're going to be doing in 2025 is they're going to build what's called a transcoder. Any digital voice mode to any other digital voice mode simultaneously. And that's the way they're going to build it is it's going to have a pretty beefy processor. It's going to have two of these proprietary codec chips. So it's coming in as say M17. It's being decoded to baseband audio. And then for your instructions, like if you're on a System Fusion repeater, it will go out as System Fusion or DMR or whatever. So I'm gonna give up on my DMR and my D-Star, and I never had a System Fusion. That's a longer discussion. I'm going to give up those radios, and I'm going to start investing in M17 radios, and I'm going to buy one of these transcoders, and that's going to be what I'm going to be putzing around in my shop with. And when you're going to be talking to me on digital voice, it's going to be I'm going to be hearing it and transmitting it as M17.
Steve, are there
So,
any, excuse
go ahead.
me, are there any M17 capable repeaters in Western Washington?
Not that I'm aware of.
And I just thought I'd mention to Brooks or anyone else interested is DroidStar does get you M17 Android DroidStar, and there is one M17 net that I'm aware of on Saturday at 10 a.m. from Oklahoma City. Apparently, is they're big on M17.
Yeah, if you want to play with M17 directly, the easiest way to get started is to get a MMDVM hotspot, which has a built-in little micro radio. It's essentially a micro repeater, or it's a micro node, radio node, and then you get connected into the many internet networks, and then happily in your house or even in your vehicle you can be doing M17, especially if you buy one of these handhelds. I really, as fun as that is, to me that's not the end game. The end game to me is I want to be doing it over the air. I want to be doing M17 over the air, and within my shop I have several test repeaters that I have bought over the years that I picked up cheaply. I'm gonna do what I'm talking about. I'm going to go through the nuts and bolts of fitting an MMDVM into my two test repeaters. I've got one for 220, and I've got a Yaesu DR1X that before the firmware upgrade made it unhackable. I've got the old one that is hackable. So I'm going to try to walk the talk here, and I am in no way, shape, or form an expert on building or updating repeaters, but I'm going to learn how to do this because this is something that I would love to see in the world. And if you want to see it, you better be prepared to do it. So let's see. AB6MB, Jeff, go.
Excuse me, I'm not sure how my hand got raised there or how you saw me. Good job on this. A lot of different things that modes that I hadn't heard of, and I kind of got on this by accident. By the way, I didn't I didn't mean to be a speaker here. Um, anyway, we'll keep up the good work on that, and I'm going to definitely subscribe to the newsletter.
Thank you.
It definitely sounds interesting, and I did not when I first looked at the newsletter. I thought it was a subscription only. I didn't see on the far right the free one.
Yeah, that's them. If I had the ability to make that the free part the default, I would do so. I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Joseph Trimble, a fellow Bellingham resident, and he's also a longtime reader of Zero Retries, and I just want to say hi, Joseph. Glad you could catch this.
I have another question. Where does the name Zero Retries come from?
Fair enough. So I'm a product of what I'm talking about, because packet radio happened at exactly the right time for me. I was in my 20s. I had been curious about amateur radio, but to be honest, it didn't excite me all that much. The most exciting thing about amateur radio was RTTY back in the day. I had found some issues of 73 magazine in my local library back when I was growing up in a small town in Ohio, and reading the column RTTY Loop got me interested because it was radio and it was computers and it was data. But it wasn't until packet radio came along that I got seriously interested in getting my amateur radio license. So the way packet radio works is that you transmit a packet with what's called a cyclical redundancy code, CRC, to basically it's essentially a parity check. And the receiving station decodes that and says, okay, looks like the message is good because the CRC is good. But if it isn't, you have to retry. So the original explanation of zero retries is perfect, is if you have a perfect transmission where the CRC is good, you have zero retries. The really bad channel is when you have a lot of retries. But more accurately, my particular inspiration for using the term zero retries was the newsletter, the name of the newsletter of the Northwest Amateur Packet Radio Association back in the day. And NAPRA is long gone. The original zero retries is long gone, but it now lives in the Internet Archive. I sent all of my paper copies of zero retries to the Internet Archive, and they're now online for everybody to read. And so the name was just sitting there unused, and I started using it. And the original editor the creator of zero retries and its original editor, Bud Churchward, WB7FHC, was a fellow member of NAPRA, and now Bud lives up here in Birch Bay. And Bud gave me his blessing. He says, I have no angst at all about you taking over the name Zero Retries. So that was as much of a blessing as I needed for using that name. Yes, thank you, Joan.
All right, very good. Anybody else have any other questions before we wrap it up? Okay, well, thank you very much, Steve. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us here. Thank you for the presentation.
Well, thank you for the invitation to talk, and I really hope that PSRG might be receptive to the idea of setting up one of their repeaters, lesser used repeaters for MMDVM, because I would love to try this in the real world, not just the confines of my shop.
All right, very good.
And I would be happy to do a dedicated presentation about the idea if there's interest in that.
Okay.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say that speaking of repeaters, I think maybe Quentin might like to say something about our repeater roundabout effort coming up and just how many repeaters we have involved.
Thank you for the shameless plug there, Jack. This is the third year the repeater roundabout's running, and we're currently sat at 175 participating repeaters. They're all FM, and big shout out to Matt, who's online today, for invaluable help in getting us to that number. Thanks so much. And that's coming up in a week and a half or so. No, 2 weekends. Yep. So do join us on the air.
We've got a great website too. What is that exactly, Quentin?
Could it be repeaterroundabout.com?
Possibly.
Roundabout?
Repeaterroundabout.com. It's a contest on local repeaters. There are some in your area, Steve. Treat it as a collaborative entry-level contest. If you have a basic HT, you can get on and make some contacts. And it's happening all over the state this year and into Idaho.
Okay, deal.
Take a look at repeaterroundabout.com. Yeah.
I keep forgetting, Quentin, to add 441.1, the K7BEL repeater on there. Is it too late?
It's not too late. I just need to know who owns it, what the group is, frequency, offset, and location.
Yeah, Bellevue Communications Support.
Okay. I'd always heard this pronounced as repeater roundup.
So many people call it the roundabout, but it's the roundabout.
That's the 6 meter roundup.
Blame Jack for the 6 meter roundup.
Handshake. Well, that's the secret handshake. What you call it?
maybe you want to also take over the repeaterroundup.com and just redirect it for all the misguided folks like me.
It makes me think of pesticides.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, Thank you, folks. I very much enjoyed it. I'm going to say 7-3.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve.
Great presentation, Steve.
Appreciate it. Tina.